Was he pushed out by administration? Yeah. Yes, he was. And I don't blame the administration. It is an unceremonious end to a Hall of Fame career, but it is the end that Jim chose. And when I hear guys like P.J. Carlesimo call it a disgrace, I'm sure over the course of today there will be other Jim Boeheim defenders or coaching colleagues or longtime college basketball people that say somewhat of the same thing. They will be misinformed. They will be misguided in that opinion, and here is why. Jim chose this exit. And that's a very important stipulation here. Jim Boeheim chose this exit. For the last 10 years, he's now 77, going to be 78 for next season. For the last 10 years, Syracuse's athletic department, not always the most properly run, might I add. So this is not an overall defense of the administration, but they have asked Jim for a timeline. Now, 10 years ago, Jim could have said, I want 5 more years. 10 years ago, he could have said, I want 8 more years. 10 years ago, he could have said, I want 10 more years. And they would have been giving that to him. He refused to answer the question. I'll coach as long as I want to coach. Jim always wanted the control. Mike Hopkins was seemingly the self-appointed successor. He was a player under Boeheim in the 80s. He was a longtime assistant coach. He led the recruiting. Hop waited and waited and waited and waited. And he also waited for a timeline. It didn't matter if that timeline was 10 years. There was just some timeline in place. Ultimately, Mike Hopkins left for Washington because he, like the rest of everybody, was just going, it's fine if Jim wants a coach for a while, but I just need to know how long, what's the date on that? What's the expiration date here? Jim refused. Jim then recruited his sons to play and was again asked, is this a 4-year process here? You'll have 4 years with one of your sons, a year or 2 with your other son who transfers. Then at the end of that, is that maybe it? Jim refused to answer the question. Wouldn't give anybody any answer, no finality. Basically saying, I decide, and I'll let you know. Okay. Jim then comes to these last 2 seasons, and they're not a good basketball team. They're an under 500 team. They're a middle-of-the-pack ACC team that has bad non-conference losses. They lose to non-conference mid-majors at the Carrier Dome. And again, he is being asked, Jim, what would you like to do? I'm not answering. I decide. So now we come to this year, and in the last month of another losing season, and as an overview, for the last decade since they went to the ACC, they've been a middle-of-the-road team of the ACC. They're not Duke. They're not North Carolina. They're not Virginia. They're not winning national championships. They have a couple of Final Four runs, but those are primarily a middling team that gets hot in March because they confound the opponent with a 2-3 zone. Those are not 1 seeds and 2 seeds and 25-win teams or 30-win teams. Those are middle-of-the-road ACC teams that get knocked around for 3 months in the conference and then get to March and they move through 2 weekends because no one's ever seen the zone. We get to this year, last month. Jim snipes at student media, which, okay, he's done that for many years. He did that when I was there as well. But then goes on a tirade about how the media doesn't understand, the fans don't understand, nobody wants him to retire. The sport sucks now. Everybody's cheating except him. And all the good coaches have left. Then they celebrate the 20th anniversary of the 2003 national championship team. Carmelo comes back and they do this real cool thing, which, you know, is awesome for fans. But it is a reminder of how far they've fallen. That was 20 years ago. 20 years. And When you look at the program today versus where it was then, they're not getting Carmelo Anthony's anymore. They're not. They're not getting five-star kids anymore. And they're missing the tournament. So that's a reminder of where they currently are. And then the coup de grace is plenty of fans in Syracuse are saying, you know what? He's 78, missing the tournament, no five-star kids, probably should retire. Drum beats growing louder. And Jim does a post-game press conference and says all these people that were in the building tonight, they don't call sports talk radio. Nobody that calls sports talk radio actually attends games. They're not the season ticket holders. They don't speak for the fans. They don't speak for the fan base, which we played this clip the other day, is just burying your head in the sand. If you don't think any of the 25,000 people that are there have called sports talk radio, I mean, you're out to lunch. Secondly, Jim himself routinely calls sports talk radio when he hears something he doesn't like and weighs in. So now you're just kind of ripping everybody all of the time, and the team's not good, and you still haven't given anybody any type of timeline. They're one and done of the ACC tournament. Once again, a middling season, no March Madness, what have you. And you've just basically said incorrect, inaccurate things. And I'm sure, I don't know this, but I'm sure the administration probably said, Jim, one more year, and then, you can announce the retirement, and next year we're going to have the send-off. And I'm sure Jim said, I make the call. To which they had to say, okay, if you're going to force us to force you out so that we look like the bad guys, now is the time. They've lost by 30-some-odd points to unranked teams this month. They've gotten drilled by mediocre competition. One and done in the ACC, and he's sniping at everybody that would dare question him. He dared them to make a decision. And so I'm sure his basketball brethren will side with Jim Boeheim today because the guy is a Hall of Fame head coach with more than 1,000 wins. He was an assistant coach on gold medal teams for Team USA. He won a national championship, 5 Final Fours. He had an amazing career. But I'm sure those Boeheim supporters will side with Boeheim today and make the administration look like the bad guys. Jim forced them to do this. It was either do this or just keep waiting until Jim stops coming to the facility. And Jim couldn't let his ego down. And it's his greatest flaw. The combativeness and the ego to always be right. He couldn't accept a swan song. He couldn't accept being done. He could have gotten applause. He could have gotten admiration. He could have gotten respect. He could have gotten honor. He couldn't. He couldn't do it. It wasn't in his DNA. He had to have control. He had to be right. He had to be right all of the time. You were always wrong. He was always right. And this is the end. And it is an end like Bobby Knight. It is an end like Woody Hayes. It is an end like a lot of coaches have, where you had control for all of these years, and you can be the tyrant, and you can be the bully, and you can be the guy that pushes everybody around. But at some point, somebody has to make a call because you're not winning anymore. And then you don't have the control, and you don't know what to do. These college campus kings have been football and basketball coaches. And Jim's been the king for 47 years, and he likes being the king. And so he could never relent to anybody else's decision. Nobody else's opinion mattered. Not to say he wasn't a really good head coach. Of course he was. But he chose this path. And so when PJ Carlesimo calls it a disgrace, I have to say that's incorrect. Unless you believe Jim Boeheim created the disgraceful exit. Administration was left with no recourse but to either be the bad guy or let him just keep showing up to the facility forever until he croaks. And that doesn't do anything for your program. Jim Calhoun ended up coaching at a Division III school because the time was up. Is that what Jim wants to do? Go to D3? Go coach Lemoyne? Go coach SUNY Cobleskill? I mean, this is what he forced the administration to do. And again, I'm not a huge SU defender when it comes to that athletic department, president, administration. But there was, what are you going to do? Just keep waiting until Jim finally croaks? That's not right. The program had flatlined. That has to be the decision.